I'm going to say good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. And in case you haven't attended one of our events before, I'm Angelina Lippert. I am the Chief Curator of Poster House, which is the first and only museum in the United States dedicated to the art and history of the poster. Tonight, I am joined by two of my nearest and dearest quarantine buddies, Nicholas Lowry of Swann Auction Galleries, which also happens to be one of the leaders in poster auctions in America, and Don Spiro of the Green Fairy Society, which brings together absinthe lovers in New York, but thanks to COVID, their programming has also moved virtually so anyone can enjoy the wonders of Lautrec's favorite beverage. Now, if this is your first Posters and Cocktails event, how this will go is Don will teach us a cocktail, and then we can sip it while Nico tells us everything about posters for music halls and other similar venues. About halfway through, we'll switch back to Don and then back and forth until we're all very thoroughly drunk and full of poster knowledge. Now, while both of them are talking, I will be acting as MC and I'll be monitoring the chat. So I will interrupt whoever is speaking with your questions. And then we'll also have some time at the end for questions as well. And please, when you're writing questions, there's a little like drop-down menu that says all panelists and attendees. That's the only way that everyone can see what you're saying. Otherwise, no one sees what you're saying. So now that we've covered all of that, Don, what are we starting with this evening?
Okay, we're going to start with a bijou. Can you all hear me? Okay. Good. Okay, great. A bijou is a classic cocktail from the turn of the 19th to the 20th century. Have to say that these days. It's a gin cocktail. Gin was very popular all through Europe at the time. And this cocktail was actually invented by a guy named Harry Johnson, and it's in his book here in 1900. And it's named bijou, which is French for jewel. The reason it's named jewel is because his recipe calls for a third wine glass of chartreuse, green, a third wine glass of vermouth, Italian, that's red, and a third wine glass of Plymouth gin, although most people today just use any gin. And that means that you have the gin for diamond, vermouth for ruby, and chartreuse for an emerald. So that's what we're going to make. Now, a more modern recipe, Del de Groff recommends a 3-to-1 ratio with the gin to make it more gin forward. But this is the traditional way, and it's a way a lot of times you'll get it in different bars. So that's how I'm going to make it. So let's start with gin. I am using Plymouth gin because I happen to have it. And for the other cocktails I'm going to do with gin, I'm going to use another gin. So this is our first cocktail. I'm going to make it small. So just an ounce of gin. There we go. An ounce of green chartreuse, which is an herbal liqueur. It's made by Carthusian monks in the Carthusian monastery in Vauvert. Still, in fact, it's in France. It's one of the great herbal liqueurs that's actually still made by monks. It's been for hundreds of years. So an ounce of that. There we go. And last, sweet vermouth, which is red vermouth. It's Italian vermouth. It doesn't necessarily mean it's from Italy. It means it's made in that style. And I'm going to use Carpana Antica. It's a vermouth that I really like. Good red sweet vermouth. There we go. So that's equal parts. Now, modern recipes also call just for these ingredients, but the original one calls for a dash of orange bitters. So I'm going to add some orange bitters.
Don, we do have a question from the audience.
Yes.
If somebody doesn't have chartreuse, is there something that they can sub in?
That's really hard. It's really specific on the chartreuse, not just because of the flavor profile, but also because it's green that gives it the emerald. Let me think.
Could you do absinthe or something like that?
No, I would think maybe, possibly another herbal liqueur. They all have very unique flavors, maybe like a possibly Bekarovka or something like that. It is expensive. That's why I recommend getting the smaller bottles. They do have big bottles, but the smaller, I would say, the better, just because you're not going to use it all that often, unless you're someone like me. So. But this is basically it, the equal parts. And then going to grab some ice. And you notice this cocktail has booze, booze, and booze with a dash of booze. So there's no cream, there's no egg, there's no juices. So you don't really need to shake it. You can just stir it. Just put a bar spoon down in there. You can shake it. There's nothing wrong with shaking it, but it's not exactly necessary. So let's get a little cocktail glass here. Got our strainer. And then, if you'd like, it's perfectly good just that way, but Harry Johnson recommends garnishing with an olive or cherry with some lemon. So I've got a lemon twist here that I cut earlier. And let's see, stick a cherry in there. Little near side, here we go. And that's our garnish, and that is our first cocktail of the night, the Bijou. Cheers. Back to you.
Again, I'm just stuck here drinking plain old bourbon, and it's just a crime against the cocktail humanity as a whole. But that looks delicious. Angelina, verify, delicious?
It's really good. It's really, really good.
Excellent. When this is all over, you're going to have to make me all these cocktails again.
It'd be my pleasure.
All right. Well, thank you. I mean, I would look forward to that. Maybe not over the course of a single evening, but 2 evenings. With that out of the way, I want to start this presentation, which the poster house entitled Standing Ovation, and which Don, Angelina, and I sort of in a huddle interpreted as the history of cabaret and music hall posters. So those of you who came to specifically learn about the lives and graphic design motifs of various performers will be slightly disappointed. There's only a little bit of that. But what we do have is just an extraordinary graphic array of what I think could be referred to as the history of modern hedonism. It's just extraordinary. And a lot of these images are controversial by today's standards, to be very fair. A lot of them are controversial by very recent standards. You'll see a lot of objectification. So this is not a political presentation in any way. God knows we've had enough effing politics this week to last a lifetime. This is a glorious love song to the history of cabaret posters. And with that, I want to begin at the beginning, if I can. In the beginning, there was the Moulin Rouge. And to be fair, the Moulin Rouge was not the very first cabaret, but it certainly was the most famous of its time and remains the most famous and infamous to this day. Why is my slideshow not working? There we go. So here we have a poster from the year that the Moulin Rouge opened in 1889. The poster is by Jules Cheret, you'll recognize that. Eagle-eyed poster aficionados will also recognize this as the poster that appears in a very famous photograph with Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec and Henry Ziegler, the impresario of the Moulin Rouge, standing outside the new establishment looking at this poster. Now keep in mind, like I said, it wasn't the first music hall, so it did have a little precedence to work on, but the idea of trying to entice the populace, working class and aristocracy and bourgeoisie alike, to these establishments was very new. And it's interesting to note that in this very first poster, what Cheret thought would be the most tantalizing thing that he could possibly depict was young ladies on donkeys. Woohoo! I mean, this was going to be a night to remember, but keep in mind, this was brand new and it would have been extremely curiosity inducing, I would imagine, if nothing else. it is good to notice the red mill there, the Moulin Rouge, right in the center. There was, in fact, a red windmill on top of the doorway to the Moulin Rouge. We'll be seeing that in some other posters. But this is how advertising began. I should also point out that for 1889, the low dress on the woman in yellow is very pronounced, and for that era, very low. And Chiret really was the master, one of the first masters of using sex to sell products, and in this case, nightclubs, in this case, the Moulin Rouge. And while it's interesting to imagine using sex to sell, say, oil for lamps, I think the idea of using winsome and attractive and scantily clad women for nightclubs, as you will see, and as you well know, really became the norm.
Nico, we have a question about the windmill part of the Moulin Rouge. Like, why windmills? Does it have anything to do with Don Quixote? Is it jousting at windmill? Like, what's the windmill connection?
It has nothing to do with Don Quixote. Just to let you know, this was in Paris, not in Spain. It was in Montmartre, which there were a lot of windmills in Montmartre. The Moulin Rouge, as far as I know, never was a working windmill, but there was another nightclub called the Moulin de la Galette, which I believe was situated at the base of a working mill.
It was.
So that's what's that?
It was situated at the base of a working windmill. I did know that.
Thank you for verifying. That's excellent. So here we go to the following year, 1890, which is Chiret's next poster for the Moulin Rouge. The Paris Can-Can, one of the things that the Moulin Rouge is most famous for, by all the celebrities and dancers. And what's interesting here, I think, by modern standard, is at the woman's left elbow are all of these leaflets showing the faces of the dancers. I mean, in a way, this was a very early indication of things to come in the sex trade. Those of you who were ever in Amsterdam in the 1990s or early 2000s, or in Las Vegas for that matter, where along the strip, men would hand out cards with women's pictures on them that you could call. This was a very early example, if not of that per se, then of objectifying women to come ogle at in these nightclubs. You see they're advertising 50 musicians. It's a spectacle every evening. And again, you have a rather busty woman bursting out of her tight top. The following year, so now the second year of the club's existence, 1891, Toulouse-Lautrec created his very first poster ever. And it's very difficult to continue on an extraordinary artistic career when you begin your poster designing career at the absolute apex of the entire field. And that's what Lautrec did. By all accounts, this is one of the most famous posters of the era. It is certainly considered his best and certainly his most valuable poster. What you can't really see from this image is that it is over 7 or 8 feet tall. It's three sheets of paper. The top sheet just says Moulin Rouge concert, and then half of the word ball on it. You can sort of see the demarcation there in color. What's wonderful about this image is the white of the woman's petticoat, the very avant-garde and sexual way that she's lifting her leg. You can see that in the shock of the man in the foreground. I can't believe it. But he can believe it, and you could see it too if you go. It was, again, beginning to monetize the sexiness of the dancers and the sort of kinky and dirty nature of the entire event. One of the things about this that makes it such an incredible graphic design work is this wall in the background of spectators depicted only in silhouette, all very clearly marked. And you can tell by their hairstyles, you can tell by their hats that these are upper middle class people. But that wall of silhouettes is something that was really used and used again. We're going to see it twice more in this presentation. I'm going to jump here ahead just briefly to 1913. This is a poster from Germany by Ernest Lubert. And again, in the foreground here, you see this same idea of the silhouetted wall of people in the front, plus then the wall of solid dancers in the back. So it was a motif that was used and used again. Moving on, this is still 1891. This was the same time, the same year that Lautrec did his poster. But here's another artist whose name is Jose Bellon, not at all famous. And again, you have the red mill, and here you have the, what are they called? The spokes of the mill, catching all of these exotic figures, performers, little cupids, pierrots, aristocrats, all being caught up in the big swirl of excitement that surrounds this spectacle and this concert ball that happens every night. Everybody was getting into the action. This is Alfred Choubrac, Au Joyeux Moulin Rouge, Paris qui danse. That was probably the name of the particular performance that was done that night. This poster is a little bit later. It's circa 1890s, but it's probably 1895 to 1900. What we begin to see here for the very first time, and for the first time in this presentation, I'm not saying that this is the first time ever, but what we see here for the first time for our purposes tonight is the gentleman, the well-coiffed and aristocratic gentleman dancing with the woman, the prince and the showgirl. And this is a motif that we're about to see more and more and more. But before we do that, we're going to get to another way that the Moulin Rouge was advertised. It was advertised not just by the ribald excitement inside, it was advertised by its interesting architecture and situation in Montmartre on the outside. And this poster by Rodel, and you may well ask, what was Rodel's first name? Okay, you may not ask, but were you to ask what was Rodel's first name, I would tell you we don't know. Although there are several posters attributed to his hand that he has signed, he's only signed using his last name, and we don't know his first name. And I love that because there's still so much to learn about the poster industry, and there's still so much that we don't know. These were very talented artists who largely labored in obscurity. The obscurity of the future aficionados not knowing your first name, horrifying, horrifying. Just ask our soon-to-be ex-president, he would tell you, just horrifying. But here you see the Moulin Rouge from the outside, and you see a beautifully dressed woman leaving for the night, it seems. This poster has a big blank area. It's not blank here, but where all the text is on the left, where it says Moulin Rouge. It was a stock poster where different events could be overprinted there. But what's important here is you do see the outside, you do see the theatrical red mill on top of the entrance to the music hall. And this poster is great. Researching this presentation, I came across a couple of posters I have never seen before. And this is one of them by an artist named Tony Menards, who was a painter. And like so many painters, he was very fluent in the language of the demi-mondes of the Paris nightlife. He spent a lot of time cavorting with and depicting prostitutes and pimps and gangsters. But this poster, again, you see the Moulin Rouge from the outside. It even has its name on the base, if you can see it there at the base of the red mill. And this just fabulously attired woman, it's unclear whether she's coming or going, and that's not really important. I think what they are trying to convey, what Menards is trying to convey here, is that the event was not only inside with all the showgirls, but it was outside. It was a spectacle, and you had to be seen here, and you needed to be seen, and you needed to show up dressed like this gigantic meringue and be appreciated by tout Paris. But it's a wonderful, wonderful image, especially interesting when you notice the absolutely bland expression on her face. She's all dressed up and could not care less to be there. This is another poster. It's not actually for a nightclub. It is for a theatrical production at some point in the 1890s called Montmartre. But you get an idea of, even back then, the meme of the prince and the showgirl and the sort of gangster-like man, weasel-like smoking a cigarette in the background. But here we have a showgirl with her petticoats and her garters being paraded on the shoulders of a bemonocled, top-hatted, horny aristocrat. And again, I think you see the two mills here, do you not? There's the mill in the foreground, which may be the Moulin de Galette or just one of the existing mills in the area, and the theatrical Moulin Rouge in the background. Like I said, the Moulin Rouge wasn't the first cabaret in Paris, but it was the most famous. I want to go through some of the others now. Arguably the most famous cabaret poster of all is this poster for the Chat Noir. I think many people know the poster, know the imagery so intimately well, but may not realize that what it was advertising was a cabaret. And it's curious that in this just iconic image, and I know I use that word frequently, but it is an iconic image. There is not a dash of lasciviousness. There is not a dash of sex appeal. There's not a dash of the exotic. There's nothing here except this very mysterious and alluring black cat. The Chat Noir opened up in 1881, so 8 years prior to the Moulin Rouge, but it moved to its new address in 1895. This poster is from 1896, but I trust you're all familiar with that. The El Dorado was another music hall in Paris. Here you see Charest again, a muse just lost in the joys and the winsome eroticisms of music, playing her tambourine with Pierrots at her feet, accompanying her on the banjo. Looks like an awfully swell time. One of the other very famous venues was the Folies Bergère, and hours can be spent on posters and advertising for the Folies Bergère. It was a circus, it was a nightclub, it was a dance hall. Everything happened there. They were performing acts. I think Buffalo Bill performed there when he was in Paris. But this is just a wonderful take on the showgirls behind the scene, waiting for the curtain to rise, looking through a hole, I guess if not in the curtain, then in the stage boards, peering out to see perhaps which one of their suitors is in the audience, who will be ogling them tonight. Again, the interesting thing about this graphically is that it very easily could make the viewer feel that they were the person that these showgirls were looking at through the hole, a very early glory hole. Angelina, I say that for your purpose only.
You know I love a glory hole, Nico.
I don't know that, but doesn't surprise me. La Folie Pigalle was in La Place Pigalle. And again now, maybe not again, here for the first time, we're beginning to see full-on nudity, or at least full-on exposed breasts. Almost like a surprise look. She's jumping out of a box. What other surprises will there be? Innocently holding 2 cherries in her mouth. Innocent, I think not. But certainly a very energetic, attractive, and winsome image there by the artist Vailook. And then for the Ambassadeurs, another well-known club. This one sort of in a beautifully graphic, rhetorical way says, oh, look, we have nudity. Oh, but you can't see it. Oh, but you can see it, just a little bit above the banner that's being used to self-censor it. This is a lovely image because it's posters within posters. As you can see, this Bill poster has posters under his arm. He's plastering this poster over other posters. And he's also very self-referentially putting on the censors banner across this performer's modesty. But you get a good idea, even though she's trying to hide behind her own arm under her elbow, we can all see what's happening, and we're all very excited. Everything new, too new. Go to the Ambassadeurs. But the Ambassadeurs was really made famous in another work by Toulouse-Lautrec. This is a little bit earlier. This is 1892. And this is, of course, Aristide Bruant. This is another one of Lautrec's immortal depictions of Parisian nightlife, both an immortal image of the performer and immortally important as an artwork. Aristide Bruant was one of the early celebrities of the French nightclub scene. Yvette Gilbert was another one. There were many others, but this one really stands out. I show it to you mostly as a indication of some of the other nightclubs that were advertising at the time. Here we have.
Nico, you failed to mention the one great thing about the Bruant poster, that the shadow figure of the man in the doorway was like Lautrec poking fun at Bruant for being gay.
I left that out because I didn't know.
Oh, really? Oh no, it was like
Lautrec
frequently had, I mean, as you know, he always like had like jokes with his friends who were usually the people that populated his posters. And so he put this like male like sailor figure in the background being all like leering at Bruant to like make fun of the fact that he was, at that time to make fun of the fact that he was gay.
That's fantastic. I really had no idea. That's great. That's why I didn't mention it. I didn't leave it out. I didn't know it. Now I know it. And when you guys tune in 20 years for the rehash of this event, I hope I'll remember that enough to bring it up. That's great. I didn't even know Bruant was gay.
Oh,
so,
yeah. Naturally gay.
Okay, there we go. Jules Alexander Grun, one of the other great music hall artists of the era. Here we have a mixture of everything. We have the aristocrat, also bemonocled and top-hatted. We have women who are so scantily clad, their nipples are basically on parade, albeit covered enough for the censor's point of view in very gossamer sheer fabric. Angelina, perhaps you know, because I don't, and I didn't have time to figure this out, what the two policemen are doing in the background.
No idea. I just know that, I mean, Grun always put policemen in the background of his posters. Usually the policemen are like interacting with the ladies or...
No, that's true. I just figured it meant something, and
Oh, no idea.
I figured you know. Okay, not to put you on the spot like you put me on the spot, but I was just asking. But again, you get this wonderful du Château de Tabarin. The Tabarin, we'll be seeing this club again in the 1920s and 30s. But you get this idea that if you are a moneyed aristocrat, this is the place to go for a wild time. Look how happy he is in all of his portliness. He is just being admired head to toe and all points in between by these two absolutely delightful showgirls. And an even more obvious depiction of the prince and the showgirl. This is Georges Redon. It's 1906. This is from a show called Le Tournée de Grand Dukes. Basically the Grand Dukes of Russia, who would tour around the French music halls, specifically trying to pick up performers as their mistresses. So already in 1906, they were playing into this, real meme of the prince and the showgirl, and Redon really depicts that quite, I don't know if charming is the right word, but quite well. And here in another poster by the same artist, also this is a year earlier, actually 1905, you see the red-nosed, leered, mustachioed aristocrat, maybe trying to smell the perfume of the showgirl, but that might be my being a little kind to his actual intentions. Again, whoops, costume malfunction. It seems like her dress has fallen off her shoulder there, but you get the idea. They were already playing up these cabaret establishments as great places to hook up if you were rich. This is another poster that I did some research on, that I came across while researching this presentation that I had not seen before, by an artist named Dupuis. Take a really close look at this. This is mind-blowing. Walhalla was not a well-known establishment by any means. Not only is this the first time I've seen this poster, it's the first time I've heard of the music hall. Take a look in the background. Every attendee at the nightclub is an elf, is a Santa Claus-like elf. I've looked at it 1,000 times and I can't look at that. They all have little red hats and big white beards. It's nuts. It's supposed to be showing a woman overlooking the balcony and seeing all of the excitement and everything that's happening on the floor of the cabaret. You see what I'm saying? They're all garden gnomes. It's
like the weird, that is, I'm like,
nuts.
what is happening?
The artist had a good sense of humor, if nothing else. Go to a nightclub, hang out with elves. Less of a sexual aspect to that, I suppose, depending on your kink. This is another great poster that's incredibly rare by Marcelin Ozol. This shows a combination of the beautiful people and the activity inside. This is an internal scene. It looks almost like Mardi Gras, where people are in the balcony throwing down streamers at the revelers who are below. Again, a bemonocled, top-hatted gentleman with two women. These women are not showgirls, as far as I can tell from their depiction. They are attendees, but you get an idea of how much fun, what a great party it was. An orchestra of 40, processions, dances, songs, games, just an incredible image of the fun that you could have and the caliber of the attendee who would come to these things. Paris wasn't the only place, though, where there was a great nightclub scene. In 1910, there was the Cabaret Fledermaus in Vienna. And this is not an actual poster for the Cabaret Fledermaus. It's an image that appeared in Die Fläche, a secessionist magazine. But it just sums up so much of what the secession design meant to advertising that I really wanted to include it. You've got the tragic comic face mask, you've got the robe of flowers, and you've got this extraordinary typography A lot of people think that the secession typography was a forerunner to the psychedelic typography of the San Francisco rock posters from the 1960s. And you can see why here. It's almost illegible, but it's absolutely beautiful. Here in 1903, also in Vienna, this is Edmund Adel for the Summer Orpheum Theater. I didn't talk about these Chinese lanterns that appear in so many of the other posters. They appear in some of Lautrec's pieces and some of Chera's pieces. But here they are again behind this dancer, so eye-catchingly but unexplainably depicted in green. It's still very becoming. I think it was meant to depict the nighttime shading that people might have had. I think it was supposed to be an evening shot as best as I can figure, but a great poster by Adel. Another poster by Adel from the same era. Again, you see the Pierrot here. These were sort of artistic cabarets. And again, they were just trying to appeal to the exciting things that normal people might not get a crack at. Not too many normal people then, and I assume not so many normal people now hang out with Pierrots. This is not Pierrot shaming by any means, but this is what you would expect to find if you went to Bundestheater. This one is in Berlin, actually. And the final piece I want to do in this section is a 1906 poster by Carl Leopold, The Artist Cabaret. Look at this black cat there at the bottom. Wonder where the artist got that idea from. A Pierrot we've seen a lot, but this is not a happy Pierrot. This is like a chemistry mad Pierrot who has a candle that is emitting noxious fumes, sort of playing off not the sex aspect of this, but the really sort of avant-garde, dark, artistic aspect of this artist's cabaret. So we're going to leave it there for the moment. When we come back, we're going to hit the Roaring 20s. But I think it's time for Don now to come at us with another recording and for me to quaff another cocktail, and for me to quaff some bourbon.
Well, I am happy to do this. And our next cocktail is actually going to be a rose cocktail. Now, when I was researching this, trying to find out what people were drinking in the cafes, the cabarets and the theaters in late 1800s, early 1900s, I have to say cocktails were really an American thing. They were hitting Britain, but through most of continental Europe, what people would have been drinking would have been wine and beer. And if they wanted something harder, it would probably have been brandy or maybe even like a gin or a whiskey. It wasn't so much the cocktails. So I did a little research and I found a really nice one from a little bit later, 1910. It's a cocktail created by Johnny Mitta at the Chatham Hotel on Rue Dunneau near the Paris Opera House. And it was in Harry McCahon's ABCs and Mixing Cocktails, which was about 12 years later. It's very popular in Paris in the earliest 20th century, and I'm going to show you how to make it now. It's a bit of an acquired taste. You have to kind of like vermouth. So I'm going to start with a French vermouth, which is a dry vermouth. This actually is a French vermouth, Norley Prat. It's extra dry and calls for 2 ounces of this. So here we go. 1, 2. This is a low ABV cocktail, meaning low alcohol by volume, because the vermouth is only 18% alcohol by volume. Next, we're going to go with some Kirschwasser. It's a German cherry brandy. This is actually from the Alsace region. Any Kirsch, any cherry brandy will do. It doesn't really specify. So an ounce of this. And then a teaspoon of raspberry syrup. Now you can go buy raspberry syrup. It's very easy to get, but I didn't have any at hand, so I just made some. Really easy to do. I just took some. You can take fresh raspberries. I had some frozen raspberries and simmer them with some water and equal amount of sugar, and that's raspberry syrup. That's all you need. So it says a teaspoon, although when I was making this earlier, I found it needed to be a little sweeter. And I don't really care for things too sweet, but this one I thought needed it. So I'm just going to do 1.5 bar spoons. And then add some ice. There we go. Give this a good stir. Then let's see. That's all there is to it. It says stir and strain into a chilled martini glass. I'm just using a little vintage style cocktail glass because it's prettier. And then garnish with a cherry. And there you have it. There's your rose cocktail. And I'm looking forward to seeing where we're going next with the posters. So back to you, Nika. That's good.
It is good. Actually, no, mine tastes really weird. Well, but I think it's because I used the cherry brandy from the 1960s that came in this.
Oh, that's a bottle.
Yeah, I think I got it out of my grandmother's basement when she died. I think it was there in the 60s. So
if that bottle was a showgirl, it would be diaphanously clad, and you could see all those spigots.
It would.
So you can hear me okay, huh?
Yeah, I can hear you. You can't hear us. You can't hear Dom. Can you hear me?
I can hear both of you.
I can't hear you either.
Oh no. Okay. Well, it's you.
I'm going to log off and log back on again.
Oh shit.
Yeah, I heard both of you very clearly.
Yeah, I can hear Nico fine. He was texting me through everything. He's like, I cannot hear Don. This is a problem. I blame it on him being out of Manhattan. Also, yeah, this cocktail's nasty now. Oh, and it's entirely the weird cherry brandy left over from 1964.
Well, when the pandemic ends, you have to come over to our place and I can make these for you properly.
Oh yeah, Patricia would like you to repeat the recipe while Nico's logging back in.
Oh, certainly. It's 2 ounces of French dry vermouth, 1 ounce of Kirsch cherry brandy, and I did a 1.5 teaspoons of raspberry syrup. And that's it.
Nico, can you hear us now?
I can, thank you.
Great.
Don, I missed that. I apologize. I was having technical difficulties, but I'm sure I just would have gotten jealous of whatever gorgeous drink you made.
Yeah, well, it was fun to do.
All I saw was, and good, something else to look forward to. I just saw Angelina's sort of quadro nipple bottle at the very end. That's all I saw. And then I decided it was time for me to log off and log back on again to get my sound back. That's the one.
Beautiful.
All right, are you ready? Should I pick up where I left off here?
Yeah, give us our the Roaring 20s.
No, we're going to go with the Art Deco craze here for a second. All right, you got. I'm sorry. We're going to start with the Roaring 20s.
It does say the Roaring 20s.
It does say the Roaring 20s. Yes. All right. So we're going to start now, Angelina, with a poster artist who I know you are a big fan of. This is Schnackenberg, who was sort of the king of the Munich demi-monde, and he created a wide assortment of just these sort of German expressionist, sexy, dark, macabre images of performers and nightclubs, including a small series for the Odeon Casino. And even though this is Germany now and not France, this is 1911, by the way, we do see a sort of slightly drunken, lecherous, tuxedoed man making a very heavy advance against a woman who's in attendance there, just glorious hat and a single long, wonderful red glove. But the Odeon Casino will be seeing a fair bit of that, including this piece, also by Schnackenberg from 1912. This just showing dancers, louche dancers enjoying the night there. The gentleman does have a monocle. And they are lithe and they're sexy and they're a little bit mysterious. Her eyes are in the shadows. His whole face is shaded. You get a sort of a very sensual feeling of movement here. And it looks like you see a little bit of his shirt poking out from under his vest there at the bottom. Although I suppose you can use your imagination to make anything of that. This is not a full-size poster by Schnackenberg. This is a leaflet, not a leaflet. It comes from a book It was done. I love this because it shows a very different side of the Odeon Casino. Come to the Odeon Casino, eat fruit. So not really a decadent image by any means, although you do see the dancers in the background, sort of an entangled weaving mass. You do see the gentleman in the left foreground drinking his drink through a straw. Classy. And of course, you could admire the woman's very prickly hat. Look at her eyes, though. Look at her sallow yellow eyes. It's just an extraordinary detail. And I think it speaks a lot to the habitués of this world. It was probably more seedy than it was elegant, despite how these images might look. Moving on to 1914, this is also Germany, the Odeon Casino, this by an artist named Joseph Geiss. This focuses more on the fashionable people who are going there. It shows nothing except this sort of dramatically patterned curtain that's parting, that they're walking through to get in. I have no idea if there actually was a curtain like that, but the fabric is opulent. Her jewelry, her big necklace and her stole, everything about it sort of bespeaks opulence, again, playing to the people who would have been going to these nightclubs. Hungary, still part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire at the time, didn't want to be left out. Actually, this is, I believe this is post-war. This is 1918, so it might be when Hungary was independent. Lipot Satori here, a very Bacchanalian scene. In fact, I'm sure that's Bacchus playing the piano with one hand and holding up an old champagne glass in the other hand, and the woman is drinking out of it from a straw. Lecherous old man with a top hat and a monocle behind her. The meme is universal, at least across the European continent, as they're enjoying themselves. And the same artist did this piece a year later, 1919. I don't think there's anything particularly erotic about couples sliding down a bottle, is there? Nothing suggestive at any means?
Oh no, I was gonna make a girthy comment.
I see, yes, a lot of girth. But again, you see the pianist, you see really just like the happy-go-lucky nature. This was 1919, so it was at the very, very beginning of the Roaring Twenties. This piece here, also from 1919, in Vienna, same idea that we saw for the Odeon Casino. This couple with just such extraordinarily patterned fabric on their clothing. Look at her coat and look at the curtains. The detail is exceptional. Even her hair and his muff. Look at his muff. He's wearing a monocle. He's wearing a top hat, but they are decked to the nines. He's got a beautiful mustache. I will give him that. You can see that they were advertising this establishment as a place to see and be seen. Also, just from a design point of view, the typography here is beautiful. Cabaret Bonbonnerie, the candy, the bonbon cabaret, the candy cabaret, also not singularly unsuggestive. 1919, again, we're back in Hungary here. Showgirl sitting on a stool, knocking off the aristocrat's top hat as she pours her cocktail on his head. I am entirely sure that he was so pleased to be publicly demeaned that he was turned on to such a level that all of his friends would rush to the Colibri bar to get a taste of this sexual medicine that was being distributed by this lovely nurse. Back to Vienna now. This is Marcel Vertès, circa 1920. And from an Art Deco point of view, this is just a glorious, glorious image. This couple, unlike all the other couples, actually look like they're enjoying each other's company. She's nestled into his arm against the cold Viennese winter nights. You can see some of the streetcars behind them and some of the buildings. From a design point of view, I have to say, I think the typography is very intrusive here. And even though it's interesting typography, it just screws up the whole image. But it's just a beautiful, beautiful image of this couple either coming to or about to leave the Casino Monte Carlo. Much like with that dark artists cabaret image we saw earlier, this piece from 1921 by Hans Neumann. shows a very different kind of cabaret. Don't come for the sex, don't come for the demeaning sexual acts, don't come to be humiliated. Come to ride the fish. It's really hard to say what the advertising conceit is here, but it is certainly an eye-catching image.
Is that a split-tailed mermaid riding a blowfish?
Could be. I mean, it's hard to say if she's split-tailed, if her tail is just, yeah, maybe.
No, she's split-tailed. It's the
Yeah,
siren
I see
that
it.
Starbucks uses.
Yeah. I've never heard the expression split-tailed mermaid, but if there was such a thing, this would be she right here.
The siren, if it's a split-tailed mermaid, but yeah.
Okay. Anyway, a great advertising conceit to advertise a nightclub. I would see this piece and I'd be like, wow, that's like a crazy place, but I would have no idea what to expect, what they were selling me when I came in the door. I'd wear a snorkel probably. Again, we come to the Odeon Casino. This is a little bit later. This is 1927. It's Julius Engelhard. I just think it's a lovely image. I mean, you know what to expect here. You can have a glorious evening. You can sip champagne. You'll be serenaded by a violinist wearing very bright lipstick. I think that was very much in keeping with the times. Just a lovely, lovely romantic evening. This another something else to look forward to at the Odeon Casino. Or there's this. The carnival at the Odeon Casino, woohoo! I mean, even the Germans got into the show the boobs game here a little bit. An ill-fitting top on this reveler, but you see the party raging beneath her. There's a saxophonist. There are masks. There are balloons. It really looks like a grand old time. This poster from, I believe, the late 1920s as well, and so. You see, you could go to a nightclub, you could have a romantic evening, you could have a fashionable evening, you could have a decadent wild evening, you could ride some fish with a split-tailed mermaid kind of evening. They were really marketing nightclubs in many different ways, and it would take a totally different turn at the end of the 1920s, coming into the 1930s with the Art Deco craze, which we will get to, I think, after Don regales us with yet another glorious cocktail.
I'd be very happy to. Thank you. Those are absolutely amazing posters. And I wanted to mention, I was talking about what people were drinking earlier. Of course, there would have also been champagne. People would have been drinking a lot of champagne at these clubs, or, well, they would be at least charged for champagne. Who knows what they would have been served. Now, I also do absinthe tastings. And one thing I did want to mention that at these cafes and well, at these theaters and nightclubs, a lot of times in movies, you see people drinking absinthe at them. And that was actually pretty unlikely. They would have probably been drinking absinthe just outdoor cafes or indoor cafes in the afternoon, but not while they're seeing shows. They might have had something like our next one, which is actually called a cabaret cocktail. Now, I found two recipes. I found one in the Savoy cocktail book from 1930, and it has absinthe in it. It's got a dash of absinthe, a dash of Angostura bitters, and then equal parts dry gin and Caperatif. And I thought, what's Caperatif? I don't know what Caperatif is. So I had to look it up. And it's a South African vermouth, which stopped production in the 1960s. Now there's a modern version of it. And some people, if a recipe in this book calls for Caperatif, they'll use Lillet Blanc as a substitute. But fortunately, I have a 1935 edition of Old Mr. Boston's cocktail book. And it's got a really nice recipe for a cabaret cocktail, which is completely different. So that's the one I'm going to do from 1935. So calls for 1.5 ounces of dry gin. I'm just going to use Beefeater. It's one of my favorite go-to London dry gins. So 1.5 ounces. And then calls for 2 dashes of bitters. This is a very small cocktail.
Wait, what kind of bitters, Don?
Oh, it just calls for Angostura aromatic bitters, which is just the bitters you get at pretty much most bars, I would say. Actually, would you bring me that little glass that we put away? Next, just got some dry vermouth that you can get at any liquor store. This is nothing too fancy. It's just Martini Rossi. So it only calls for a half a teaspoon of that. Put my spoon away. I'll just measure out a little bit here. There we go, just for a taste. And then quarter teaspoon of Benedictine. Benedictine is another herbal liqueur. This is very close to a Lamb's Club cocktail, which has equal parts sweet and dry vermouth. You were talking about green chartreuse earlier. I'm not sure if Benedictine would be a good substitute for that, but it might be an interesting cocktail. So there we go. Now the recipe calls for stirring with some cracked ice, but I'm going to shake it and quick chill it. There we go. There we go. Till it gets a little bit frosty, and then got a small glass here, thanks to my wife bringing it to me at the last minute. And that is perfect. And then this can also be garnished with a cherry. I'll just drop that in real quick. At the bottom. Yeah, if you don't like vermouth, you might not like it, but if you like vermouth, this is a cocktail you're probably going to love. So this is the Cabaret Cocktail 1935 from the old Mr. Boston book. So cheers, and can't wait to see what else you got there, Nico.
All right. Yeah, the best is yet to come, I think, although we're covering so much ground and there are a lot of different styles and different countries and different favorites. I'm hard pressed to say which are my favorites, but it's possibly some of the ones that are coming up. I see that Mark Resnick is here. Hi, Mark. I owe you an email.
Mark Resnick.
Hi, Mark. I think he's here more for the cocktails and the posters because he knows so much about posters. But let's get to the 1930s now, 1920s, 1930s, the Art Deco craze. The Art Deco craze, the Art Deco era in Paris was just an incredible, incredible time. And we're going to start here sort of toward the end of the decade, 1929, for another performance at the Moulin Rouge, here for a performance of all Black performers called the Blackbirds. Now, when you think of Black performers in Paris, you probably think of Josephine Baker, but Josephine Baker was not the only one at all. Here, in fact, we have an image of the world's second most famous Black performer of the time, Adelaide Hall, who's depicted here in the middle between two of her co-performers. The performer on the left, if you'll notice, is actually wearing a brooch shaped as a red mill. It's a very, very, maybe not so subtle nod to the establishment itself. The Blackbirds was an extraordinarily popular revue in America. It toured Paris. The French attitude toward Black performers and Blacks in general was so much more open and accepting than America that a lot of Black American performers moved to Paris, Josephine Baker being the most prominent of them, and they all enjoyed tremendous celebrity in the City of Lights. The artist of this poster is Paul Celan, whose name is almost synonymous with show posters of Paris in the 1920s. He did hundreds, if not more of them, including this one. Sex Appeal. The Casino de Paris was another great venue filled with shows and cabarets. This from 1932. I don't really have a lot to say about this except for the fact that the name of the show was Sex Appeal, so you can understand that the French mores at the time were a lot looser also than America. I didn't touch on any work by Loie Fuller, any images of Loie Fuller from the turn of the century. She was a celebrated dancer who had gossamer veils that she danced with in front of colored lights, and the veils would catch the colored lights, and it was like a psychedelic light show. She was very, very famous at the turn of the century and depicted by a lot of the famous turn of the century artists. But she had a very long career. And here in 1925 on the Champs-Élysées, Paul Celan does just this exceptional Art Deco image of what she looked like dancing. And it's just a great image for the Champs-Élysées Music Hall. We saw another image earlier of the Tabaran, the one by Grun with the policeman. I couldn't help but notice in the comments that people were saying that the necklaces around the policeman's neck look like breasts. It's a nice thought. I don't really know what that has to do with anything, but I'll run with that for a while. This image from 1928 is trying to show how the Tabaran was emerging from the turn of the century and entering the modern times, the 1920s. If you look on the left, you'll see a woman in a petticoat dancing the can-can. And the woman in the center, in the hot pink mini skirt or mini dress, is dancing the Charleston. So they're showing how the range of dance crazes across the decades were culminating in the most modern trend right now at the Tabaran, which was the Charleston. Now, I mentioned that the most famous of all Black American performers in Paris was Josephine Baker. She was. The Revue Nègre, the Black Revue, was one of the most celebrated and most popular shows of its era. And again, Paul Celan designed the poster for this at the Music Hall de Champs-Élysées. You see Josephine there in the middle looking sassy. There is no question that by contemporary standards, this is a fairly unacceptable image, but back then, not only was it accepted, as I said, it was celebrated, it was welcomed, and it was the talk of Paris. She was so famous at the time, it's hard to imagine a celebrity current days who was as famous as she was then in Paris. 2 years later, this was the Bal Nègre, the Black Ball. Interestingly, this was a single night performance, a single night event. It wasn't a performance, it was a ball that you could attend on the 11th of February, 1927. Celan not only designed this poster for the event, he designed the interior decorations, the decor for the theater. He also designed a booklet that was given out to the first, I think, 500 attendees, which in and of itself is beautiful and quite valuable. But this, you get an image of Josephine dancing in her very famous grass skirt. Also, if you look at the figure she's dancing with, he is moving so fast that the plaid is literally shaking off of his trousers, which is happening there. It's just a great little graphic conceit to show the sort of the level of his involvement in the dance. And then we have this poster, and this poster for a show in 1930 depicts Josephine. What's important about this for our purposes is the artist Louis Gaudin, who went by the pseudonym Zig, Z-I-G, was one of the great music hall artists of the 1920s and 1930s. Did a lot of work for Miss Danguet, did a lot of work for Josephine Baker, did work, I believe, for Marie Chevalier and other performers. But this one is just lovely. The detail on Josephine's modesty covering plume, the beauty of the bouquet, the ribbon around the neck of the cheetah. This is just a wonderful image. And the review is called Paris qui remue. At this point, cabarets and nightclubs are doing more theatrical performances. So it wasn't just a star. You weren't just going for a grand old good time. You were going to see a musical review.
Actually, Nico, if you go back to that poster for a second, we have one question that someone wants to know what those two little rectangles in the lower left are. I'm assuming they're tax stamps, right? Yeah,
that's a great question. Those are tax stamps. Those appear on a lot of posters in Paris from the 1890s throughout the post-war era. In order to hang a poster on a public siding, you needed to pay taxes on the advertising. And the way that advertisers could tell if taxes had been paid was if a tax stamp had been affixed to the poster. I'm not entirely sure why there are two. That's unusual. And it's one of those things that a lot of time collectors love to see those on posters because they figure it's a poster that was used. Sometimes collectors don't like to see it on posters because they figure it somehow distracts from the central image. It's sort of a dealer's choice call on your part as a collector, which you prefer. But those are tax stamps showing that the advertiser did pay the appropriate dues to have this hung on one of the public sidings in Paris.
Oh, and also actually in both of these posters, the name of Josephine Baker looks like it's a tip-on. Is it actually a tip-on, or is it just printed so that it goes outside, it intentionally bleeds outside of the rectangle?
No, it's not a tip-on. It may look like that. It didn't even occur to me. It's more like block letters. But this was a poster for her. It was celebrating her in every way. Her name was not an afterthought even slightly. That's why her name is the biggest thing on the poster. It just looks like that. And here you have Josephine Baker also in a grass skirt and beautiful little floral pasties, climbing a coconut tree with coconuts that all bear the likeness of her face. Again, I think there's absolutely nothing suggestive even remotely about her wrapping her legs around the trunk of that tree and shimmying up. I think that's just completely something normal that would happen. Nothing suggestive there. Also by the artist Zig. One of the other great artists of the year was Charles Kiefer. This poster for Jane Marnac, who was a performer of some note, but not of great historical resonance. But again, you see this usage of plumage. Plumes were very popular for the performers then. Also jewels. Many of these posters depicted the performers laden in jewels, bedazzled with jewels. And here for her appearance at the Casino Paris, it's not a come on, it's not alluring, it's simply a very glamorous performer swaddled in feathers and jewelry. One of the other great artists was Charles Gesmar. I love this poster because the allure here is that she performed with a monkey. That's all I have. She's covered in jewels. She's got lovely little cherry earrings, but most importantly, perhaps center of this whole poster is that she performs with a little monkey, which is very sweet. Spinelli, obviously her name, and Gesmar, the artist. Here you see Gesmar again for Miss Danguet. You'll note the plumage and the jewelry. Miss Danguet, again, it's hard to comprehend by modern standards how popular she was. Apparently Madonna held nothing on her in Madonna's prime. I mean, really, she was the tippy top of the A-list of Parisian nightlife and would have been as familiar to everybody in Paris, more familiar to anybody in Paris than basically anybody else. Here, Charles Gesmar again, 1928. This is known as Rags to Riches. It was the Miss Danguet performance in which she went from a little street urchin to this glamorous showgirl. And again, nothing bespeaks glamorous showgirl or showwoman better than intense pink ostrich plumage and copious amounts of jewels, not only a necklace, but also it looks like a bejeweled skirt. Just an incredible image, like a cascade of feathers on this one. Go back to Zig here, 1930, the Casino de Paris, Miss Danguet. I think it's a really lovely Art Deco touch. You saw Josephine depicted with a cheetah. Here, Zig is depicting Miss Danguet with, what kind of dogs are those? Those very sleek dogs.
The Borzoi?
The Borzoi, thank you. You say, oh, the Borzoi? Oh, I can't imagine, I forgot that word. But there she is with her bejeweled Borzoi. You're Borzoi shaming me. Shame on you.
So
again,
tired chat, by the way. They all got Borzoi before you did.
Thank you, chat. Thank you all for Borzoi shaming me. There's a lot going on here, and I'm drinking bourbon. So if I fail to get the word Borzoi, forgive me. But in this case, not only does she have flowing plumage, she's also wearing what appears to be a velvet gown, which is sort of interweaving with the dog's paws and with her feet, and she has jewelry around her ankles too. I think this poster really plays more to her extravagance and elegance than it does to anything else. And obviously her extravagance and elegance were on display by Zig all over the place. These from 1931. If you look at the piece on the left, Paris qui brille, you see the skyline of Paris in the hem of her, I don't know what that is, her petticoat skirt. But you see the Champs-Élysées, you see the Eiffel Tower, you see the Moulin Rouge, you see Montmartre, and so on. And again, she's got jewels everywhere. It's great. And then on the right-hand side, she's riding on horses who are covered in jewels. And in this case, she's sort of holding a plumed whip in her hand, but really just so exciting. I mean, you think of the man and the woman on the street who are viewing these posters, and they just would have been overwhelmed at the vision and at the opulence. And it probably didn't even matter what they were going to go see. They just knew it would be very, very different from their ordinary, perhaps boring lives.
Nico, someone wants to know what's the approximate size of these posters?
So that's a great question. These posters come in two sizes. One is a very manageable size, probably, you can't really see that. Look, it's this size, you don't know where my hands are. Probably about 2 feet high, but they also come in a sort of a 4.5 to 5 foot version, which are much larger and much more dramatic. But I think a lot of people really appreciate the small ones nowadays because they're easier to house. But they're two formats, large and small. This next poster, I've actually never seen this poster in real life, but I love it. It's the Palace Music Hall, and the performance was called Nudist Bar. Who wouldn't go see that show, really, even though the image doesn't quite do it the kind of justice that I would give it in my mind's eye. But those of you who want to take me to see any production, you can buy me a ticket to see the Nudist Bar at any point. I will be delighted to go. It has been pointed out that there are 2 cherries at the bottom of the cocktail glass that they're all drinking from, which are a very unsubtle nod to cherries. But it's a great image, a great and very rare image. This is another image, Angelina, we talked about this a couple of months ago in one of our other presentations. This is another poster for a one-night ball. So again, it's at the Folies Bergère, the great nightclub. It was a one-night ball, and just this wonderful Art Deco representation of 2 dancers. And if you see that sort of silhouette in the upper right-hand corner, it's very, very reminiscent of the man in the Toulouse-Lautrec poster seen in profile, going like this, covering his mouth. I think that's exactly what this artist, Picaud, is getting at. Picaud, whose name was Maurice Picaud, Picauld, but just a fabulous, fabulous Art Deco image. I think my least favorite part about it is the gentleman's eye, which looks like a fork, and a sort of puckered mouth. But other than that, I think it's a great, great image. The Folies Bergère, 1931 here. Paul Seltenhammer. There's just a lot going on in this image. Who wouldn't enjoy a naked woman being fought over by 2 cocks? In fact, that's what's happening. They're probably Gallic roosters, but in fact, she's being torn apart by 2 cocks, trying to hold them at bay. Very difficult, though. She's helpless and she's naked. But what a great show that must have been. You'd have me lining up outside the Folies Bergère. And the final item here from the Roaring Twenties. This is Un Cocktail de Femme, a cocktail of women. A review at the Folies de Paris. A little bit more of a demure image, perhaps, but you get the idea. She does have plumage in her hair, which is less depicted in less detail than some of the earlier pieces, but I think a great way to close out this this decade. Don, do you want me to get into briefly the Grand Guignol at this point, or do you have another cocktail?
I have another cocktail, and then we can end with the Grand Guignol.
Okay, very good. Then I'm going to turn it back over to you. Let me just stop the screen share here. Back at you.
Okay, great. I'm glad that you were talking so much about Paris in the 20s, because I've got my next cocktail is actually called the Parisian cocktail, and it was probably imbibed in the late 20s. I found it also again in the Savoy cocktail book from 1930. Oh, and I did want to mention Adelaide Hall. As soon as you said that name, is one of my favorite recordings is of Adelaide Hall with Duke Ellington's The Mooch. And if you haven't heard that version of it, it's the only version of the Mooch with vocals, and she just uses her voice like an instrument. It's amazing. But moving on to the Parisian cocktail, which is 1/3 French vermouth, 1/3 creme de cassis, 1/3 gin, shake well, and strain into a cocktail glass. So that's another equal parts cocktail. and I'll show you how to make it. So 1 part gin. I'm going to use Dorothy Parker. It's made right here in New York. My wife got me this bottle, and it's one of my favorite dry gins. So the recipe, as I said, calls for equal parts. So it'd be like an ounce of each, but that's too sweet for me. So I'm going to change it up for myself. You can follow along or do equal parts if you want. My recipe is going to be 2 measures of gin. That's 2 ounces of gin. There we go. And then instead of a full ounce of French vermouth, and of course this is French vermouth, but it's a product of Italy, but it's the French style. Instead of a full ounce, I'm going to do 3/4 of an ounce. And you can see this is also like the cabaret cocktail, a twist on our martini. There's lots of twists on our martini. Speaking of which, Dirty Martini, if you're watching out there, cheers. Hope you're doing well. One of my favorite people and amazing burlesque performers. And then finally, instead of equal parts creme de cassis, I'm going to do 1/4. So I'm doubling the gin and then bringing the others down appropriately. There's a lot of brands that do creme de cassis. Marie Brizard's a pretty good one. I've got Le J, but you can. It's one of those things that you can actually go to most liquor stores and get some decent creme de cassis. And then, of course, we're gonna. Oops, a spoon there. Gonna add some ice. And as it said, shake well. So we're gonna do that. And this needs no garnish. Smells good. And strain into a cocktail glass. And there we have a Parisian cocktail. And the last one of the night will be a Grand Guignol, but I'm going to save that for the very end. So cheers, everybody out there. Hope you're enjoying the cocktails. And back to you, Nico.
Thanks, Don. So we're talking about the Grand Guignol. What I think I'll do is I'll go through the Grand Guignol now, then I'll finish the presentation, and maybe you can wrap it up with the Grand Guignol cocktail at the end. Are you okay with that?
That works perfectly fine by me. Yeah.
Great. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the Grand Guignol, and I know Angelina is because
my favorite genre.
It's her favorite genre. Let me see if I can just get back up here. Hold on. We're gonna do this, and we're gonna do that. All right, the Grand Guignol Theater. So, as I said at the beginning, we're trying to focus on the history of music halls and the history of cabarets. And to be fair, the Grand Guignol was not quite a cabaret. It was not quite a nightclub, but it was a theater, and it was an exceptional theater in that all it ran were horror, blood, gore, and disaster-related theatrical events. You might say, what? And I'd be like, what? You're right. That's crazy. But it was literally like a horror movie of a theater where all they did were blood and gory performances. And they began operating as early, I can't remember when they opened, but it might have been 1906, maybe even earlier. This poster by Adrian Barrère, who was one of the great Art Nouveau artists. So, the era is definitely pre-World War I. This is how they're advertising a show at the theater. They're advertising by showing a sick, fanged doctor trepanning into a patient's skull, if that's the right word, drilling into his skull, while a nurse who's wide-eyed and excited holds his head, which is becoming slippery with all the blood that's coming out of it. And you see the sort of his accoutrements of torture, medical torture there on the table. It looks like a meat grinder and a mallet and a bucket to put things in. They're operating on this man's head. They're drilling into his brain, and that's how they're advertising the theater. It's absolutely astounding. This isn't about sex, although some of the shows, I didn't get any of these posters, some of the shows were sort of sexual perversion oriented, but mostly they were just gory blood and guts. Here's another one by Barrère of the system of Dr. Gordon Goudron. Sorry, Ari, if you're watching. Dr. Goudron and Professor Plume. They're holding a man down. Talk about kneeling on someone's neck. He's kneeling on a man's groin. One doctor holding his throat while cutting out his eye. And this is how they're advertising the theater. So you can imagine there were those aristocrats who were attracted to the cabaret posters that showed Grand Dukes hitting on showgirls. Then there were the people who were attracted to the Grand Guignol, people like Angelina, who were like, oh my God, blood and guts and trepanning and all these other things. We have to go and see it. I don't even know what this one is advertising, but it says, look at the top, one of the greatest Paris curiosities. Even in the pre-World War I days, the world knew about this astounding little theater that had these horror-filled acts. Here's a woman being kidnapped, I guess, about to be molested perhaps by a man in a very weird mask. The whole pretense is just impossible to understand. Maybe Angelina, you could shed some light on what's happening there.
I have absolutely no idea, and that's what makes it perfect.
Hard to argue with that. This poster from a little bit later, I think 1920s, 1930s, you get the full scope of the ghoulish, macabre nature of the Grand Guignol Theater, where a skeleton is trying to hug a woman who seems clearly sedated on some form of narcotic. He's coming in from behind a haunted spider web. There's a bloody handprint on her shoulder. The whole thing is just terrifying, and yet people would line up outside the theater to see the show. So I wanted to throw that in because Don does have a cocktail to do with the Grand Guignol, and I just thought that any conversation about Parisian cabarets and theaters would be incomplete without a nod of the proverbial hat to the Grand Guignol. But that does bring us now to Le Temps Moderne, which will be the final very short segment of this presentation. Angelina and I did a cabaret Instagram live video a few weeks ago, and we touched on some of these artists. I think one of the great post-war cabaret artists was René Gruau, who was a fashion designer, did advertising, and also a lot of nightclub work, such as here. You might recognize that silhouette of viewers watching the show, just like from Lautrec's poster from 1891. This is from 1956. You see the showgirls there. Oh, interesting. If we follow some of the cabaret memes, they all have plumage on their heads, which is clearly what all the world thought showgirls should wear after the wonderful wardrobes of Miss Stanguette and perhaps Josephine. Also, as you can see, but only briefly, only tantalizingly can you see through this wall of bystanders how scantily clad the performers are. But it's enough to give you a real sort of exciting taste of what's to come if you were to go to the Lido. It is magnificent, as it says there. Here you get another one of Gruau's designs for the Lido. Again, you have that sort of silhouetted wall of bystanders, which is very Lautrec-y. You also have the white of the dancer's petticoat. I mean, this really is a visual ode to Lautrec's work, but so completely modernized. I mean, although it has the same graphic ideas, it's a completely modern version of it, and just a wonderful image. I'm very captivated how the dancer is sort of looking back over her shoulder at us and smiling. And she's won me with her smile and with her jewels and with her plumage, of course, which I've come to recognize and love. Some of the more recent advertising gets a little bit more lurid. These are not quite photomontages or photographs, but by and large, they are sort of graphic depictions of photographs, and less is left to the imagination. Here, the plumage, I'm not even sure the plumage is on them. It sort of seems to be a background. Don, you know that a lot of burlesque performers use plumed fans when they're dancing, but these plumed fans aren't really hiding anything at all. Again, you see the bejeweled shorts, panties, the bejeweled pasties are all on there. And I have to imagine that the woman on the left who's wearing the top hat, that is some kind of a historical meme based on the aristocrats who would come to the shows in their top hats. I think somehow the idea of a top hat stuck in the minds of cabaret impresarios, and they use them in their shows. The Bataclan, regrettably, the Bataclan was the venue most recently remembered as the site of the tragic shooting in Paris. I think it was 2015 or maybe more recently than that. It was absolutely disastrous, but it was a very, very popular destination. This one, again, you have the feathers, you have the jewels, but even though it is the most sexy cabaret, as the headline goes, it's rather a demure image. I mentioned this, Angelina, during our Instagram chat, but one of my favorite things about this is the artist. For the longest time, I thought the artist name was Asfay, A-S-F-A-Y. It just seemed appropriate that the artist was Asfay. Apparently, though, as my research has shown me, the artist name is actually Aslan, A-S-L-A-N. But either way, it's certainly a becoming and winsome image. Only two more here to go. Again, here you have the petticoats a la Lautrec. This is a little bit more revealing, sort of leaving less to the mind's eye, in fact, leaving nothing to the mind's eye. And the woman on the left is really wearing next to nothing but a single strand of pearls. The exciting temptations at the Casino de Paris. But they are playing on the Can-Can girls there, and I just thought it was a nice throwback to the olden days. And the final one that I want to show, this also from the Bataclan Music Hall of Paris. Again, here you have the top-hatted gentleman and the showgirl. You have the plumage, you have the jewelry. It's actually a kind of a tender image. I'm not sure that's the reason I wanted to end with it. It may have just been the last one that I found, but as a nice segue into the final cocktail of the night, I leave you with this image from the 1970s for the Bataclan, and I'll end the presentation there on the history of cabaret and nightclub posters. Thanks.
Wow, that was fantastic. That's cool.
Wait, stop 1 second. Stop 1 second. Have you had that Grand Guignol theater poster on the wall behind you the entire time?
No, I just put it up while you were talking.
Holy shit! You had me there. I was saying, wow, that would have been unbelievable if you had it on the wall and I showed it. I would have. That's incredible.
Yeah, as soon as you showed it, I'm like, oh, you know what? I have that on the other wall. I'm going to bring it in here.
Well played.
I wish I'd put it up the whole time. That would have been nice.
That's great. That's great.
And of course, our last cocktail is going to be something that is going to span the entire length of what Nico was just talking about, from the Grand Guignol to modern day cabaret, because the cocktail is called Grand Guignol, but I found it in this. I have a lot of these Mr. Boston official bartenders guides. This one's actually from 2012. And I found a cocktail in here that is called a Grand Guignol cocktail. So that's what we're going to end with tonight. Let's see. It's going to start with an 1.5 ounces of dark rum. Now, the thing about rum is that dark rum means that the rum is dark. That's pretty much it. It could be through aging, it could be through caramel coloring, what have you, but it's not a sign of any quality or lack of quality. It's just a different style. And there's different brands you could do. You could do Crucian from St. Cruz, Goslings from Bermuda, Hamilton, Myers from Jamaica. I like Denizen Dark and Smith & Cross, but what I'm going to use right now is Plantation Dark Rum. It's OFTD. And it says it stands for Old Fashioned Traditional Dark, but I know 3 of the people on the back who were advisors on this. And from what I was told, the first thing they said when they tried this particular rum was, oh, fuck, that's good. So OFTD is retronym. Anyway, we're going to have an 1.5 ounces of this stuff. Any dark rum you have is nice. This one happens to be a little bit of a higher proof. So yes.
Patricia wants to know, where is OFT made?
Oh, this is a blend, and it actually says it's a blend of rums from Jamaica, Guyana, Barbados. So it's an English style rum. All of those islands were English colonies. So it's going to be a little funkier than like a more neutral Spanish style rum, or less grassy than like a rum agricole from French colonies. And then we're going to move on with 3/4 of an ounce of yellow chartreuse. The difference between this and the green chartreuse is really just the herbs that are being used in it. So it's got a slightly different flavor. It's a little lighter and I think more refreshing than the herbaceous green chartreuse. So 3/4 of an ounce of this. And this will be the one cocktail that my wife will like, because she doesn't like gin, but she does like rum. And then cherry liqueur. We've got cherry hearing, and also 3/4 of an ounce of this. It's a dark cherry liqueur, a little bit smoky. There we go. So 3/4 of an ounce of that. And this is a cocktail that we cannot stir because it's also going to have lime juice in it. So I'm going to cut a nice fresh lime. And while I'm doing that, I'm going to cut a wheel for garnish. And we'll get a juicer. Now, I'll show you a little trick to juicing limes that I like to do. Get an extra container, put your lime in your juicer, and then use a second strainer here, just a mesh strainer, to get all the pulp out of there. Okay. So one, I'm going to juice the other half too. Oops. Squirt it a bit there. Very good. And then just going to measure out 3/4 of an ounce of that. Perfect. Okay, and then we're going to fill that with some ice. Now you noticed the other shakers I was using were cobbler shakers. That means that they are self-contained and have their own strainer. This is a Boston shaker. You might see a lot of bartenders using this. It's the mixing glass and a separate tin. Just put it like that, throw it upside down. Cool. And then just going to strain that into our cocktail glass. Got a coupe here. Just garnish it with a lime wheel. Let me give it a little cut there. There we go. And this is your Grand Guignol from Mr. Boston's official bartender guide, the 75th anniversary edition from 1912. So cheers to everybody who's been watching, and thank you to Angelina and Nico. Someday I'll be drinking bourbon with you, Nico, I hope, and Angelina, come over for more of these.
Look forward to it.
Cheers.
And I'm just amazed that the for all the TNA and feathers and jewels, it was the Grand Guignol that seems to have stolen the show tonight.
The best genre.
Which is great. I couldn't be happier. And I'm probably gonna have some things to show you, Angelina, that will blow your mind in the Grand Guignol category.
I mean,
oh, I want to see those too.
You know what? It's one of those things where I just have to find them.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
that is the real horror show, is the state of my office. But I'll look for them and I will turn them up. And I think
wait, there's stuff in your office I don't know about. I'm hurt, but I'm so intrigued.
There's a lot of stuff in my office, a lot of which you don't know about. It's messy, but if I can find these pieces, there's some very, very extraordinary. I must have shown you when I got them years ago, Grand Guignol posters.
If so, I forget. But anyway, guys, we have gone like a half hour over. But thank you so much for everyone for coming. We do these once a month. We are doing, I put in the chat a link in February. We're doing a special one for Black History Month with a very prominent Black bartender who will be teaching us all about Black drinking culture. And then in March, Don, Nico, and I will be back with a
Gary Borkin.
themed. Oh, hi, Gary Borkin. Hi.
Hi, Gary.
We'll be back with an aviation-themed posters and cocktails evening. And please check out our events page and also Swann's page and the Green Fairies page, all the pages. And thank you so much for coming, and we can't wait to see you again next time.
Thanks, Angelina, for putting this together. Don, thank you for your extraordinary mixology. Everybody, thanks for paying attention. Stay safe, masks on, and keep your fingers crossed for January 20th. That's all I can say.
Bye.
Bye.
So
Bye.
long.